Hello, and thank you to everyone tuning in. My name is Puneet Mann, Vice President, Regulatory Initiatives at Scotiabank. I'm pleased to be here taking part in Scotiabank's International Women's Day She Said Summit. I'll be moderating this important session on fighting gender-based financial crime. Let's start by welcoming our esteemed panelists. First, we have Kareem Rajwani, Senior Vice President, Chief Operating Officer at Scotiabank. Kareem provides strategic direction, leadership, and oversight, enabling effective solution delivery, data analytics, threat monitoring, and is responsible for the AML Project Management Office. Next, we have Carolina Parra, Senior Vice President, Anti-Money Laundering and Internal Controls, International Banking, also at Scotiabank. Carolina is responsible for providing strategic direction and oversight for non-financial risk for international banking. Up next, Albia Castillo, SVP, AML and Internal Controls, Scotiabank, Peru. Albia is the chairwoman of the Inclusion Committee in Peru and an independent member of the International Board for the NGO Plan International, focused on girls' rights and education. And last but certainly not least, Larissa Maxell, Director for Anti-Human Trafficking Programs at the Salvation Army British Columbia Division. She leads 8 national anti-human trafficking programs, from safe houses and rehabilitation services, crisis outreach responses to education, research, and survivor-led initiatives. Thank you all so much for joining this session today. We all just watched and listened to a very impactful story by Tamia Nagy, CEO and founder of Tamia's Cause and a survivor of human trafficking. What exactly is human trafficking? Also known as trafficking in person. It's a form of modern day slavery. It's most often defined as the trade of human beings through force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of exploitation for labor, sexual purposes, or organs. According to the UN International Labour Organization, the Walk Free Global Slavery Index, it's estimated that human trafficking generates more than $150 billion in illicit profits for traffickers each year. In 2016, it was estimated that 40.3 million people were living in modern day slavery, and it exists in every corner of the world, yet is often invisible to most people. Often, traffickers prey on the most vulnerable and marginalized people in communities across the world, operating in the dark corners of the internet and the underbelly of the global economy, as noted by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. It's estimated that for every 10 victims, 5 are adult women and 2 are girls. As one of the major financial crimes we see, unraveling this problem requires sustained vigilance and action. That's why I'm happy and passionate about continuing this important conversation with our expert panel today. We're going to explore what the problem looks like, what we're doing to fight this, and the outlook. So let's kick things off. I'll direct my first question to Larissa. Larissa, you've seen firsthand how human trafficking, especially sex trafficking, can invade the lives of those affected. What are the common characteristics that in victims that traffickers most often target? And what's one common misconception of those who do become victims in this world?
It's a really great question. And in my 16 years of working specifically in this field in North America, we've seen a few interesting components. The first is that we often think it only happens to people of a particular group or from a particular area, a particular socioeconomic status. One of the misconceptions that I want to debunk is that trafficking could happen to anyone. And in fact, in many of the circumstances we see, it's often a perfect storm of intersecting dynamics. So to give you an example, something that we see is unmet core needs or gaps in functional assets. So I share this because this is relative to many people. An unmet core need could look like a place to stay. It could look like love and belonging, could look like safety or security or connection, self-esteem, could look like a good job opportunity. And someone comes along with a false promise to meet that need and says, I'll be able to assist you. Or you might have a gap in a functional asset, maybe being a newcomer to the country, still learning the language, still familiarizing, and a person offers their support or their mentorship. So we often see there's an exploitation of those core needs. But on the other hand, how we support and build our communities is that we fortify those areas. We invest in the areas that are targeted by exploiters, whether that's housing, whether that's building women and women's equity and women's leadership and opportunities. There's many spaces for us to have an impact on this issue.
Thanks so much, Larissa. Albia, a question for you. You had traveled to Uganda in recent years. What was your experience in learning about human trafficking during your trip, and how has it affected your thoughts for changing things on the ground in Peru?
Thank you for the question. This is a very personal story. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to meet and interact in Uganda, Africa, with girls between 12 and 14 years old that are mothers too. I have 3 kids, and in my conception, my kids at this age used to play, study, and dreaming with their future. But these girls who should have been playing were taking care of their children because they have suffered from sexual exploitation. For many of them, their aspirations will never become a reality. This is very, very hard to say for me. And instead, they are faced with impossible choices to secure their mere survival. As you mentioned at the beginning, and this is a very important point, there are a lot of bad money involved. I investigate about this situation, thinking again that this is happening only in Africa and only in different countries. But you know, I realize that it's happening in Peru, it's happening in Latin America, it's happening in my country, it's happening in everybody, in all the countries around the world. In the 2020 Trafficking in Person report from US government, they have a tier classification as 1, 2, 3, and Peru has tier 2 classification, the same as Uganda. So that means that we are doing some efforts, but this is not enough. The same year, I realized all the work that the Scotiabank is doing to reinforce in this transformation project that we have in anti-money laundering. And it's crucial to fight against this terrible situation with the principle of following the money, or how important is the KYC to identify this kind of terrible behavior. And just to conclude, and I think why we are doing this, you know that it's important to always start thinking why we are doing this. We are doing this because it's the right thing to do, because our customers trust on us, and because we have a purpose, and the purpose that we say is for every future. And those girls are part of our purpose as well.
Thank you, Albia. Listening to you and Larissa, you know, it makes it really real, and I can understand and empathize and appreciate the great work that's happening. Kareem, can you share your thoughts on what we've learned about this issue, including in banking, and what's needed?
Yeah, thank you, Puneet, and thank you for inviting me. And I've been working on this for many years. And, you know, one of the sort of most important things I want to highlight, and you touched upon it, and it's the size of the problem, right? The global sort of illicit proceeds are estimated to be like 4.5 trillion, of which 150 billion is in the trade of people. There are a number of estimates that say this is very low. It could be 2-3 times larger than this. That sort of puts things into perspective. And you know, what's that going to do with banks and AML? Well, people are a commodity, right? And they get traded as a commodity. And this, like anything else, these are proceeds of crime. Other thing to understand is when we say human trafficking, it takes a lot of different forms. There's sexual exploitation, child sexual exploitation, forced marriages, forced labor, domestic servitude, even organ trafficking. So, it's important to understand these concepts, because unless we understand what we're dealing with, we can't identify, we can't investigate, and we can't tackle them, right? If you look at the latest statistics from the UN report, right, which is 2020 report based on the 2018 stats, steady increase in minors, right? We see in the higher income countries more over 18s being trafficked. In the lower income countries, it's more minors, right? We see 3 times more girls being trafficked than boys, right? So again, another important stat. So 2016, it was 3 times more girls trafficked than boys, and 2.5 times more women trafficked. If you look at the 2018 report, women are 5 times more likely to be trafficked, and girls 6 times more likely to be trafficked. There's often this belief this is a foreign problem, and as mentioned a number of times, it happens in every country. In fact, 70% of the problem is a domestic problem, right? So if you look at, say, Canada, for example, and Canada is not unique, that these stats apply globally. 70% is a Canadian problem, 20% is an America's problem. That's 90% is a domestic problem. And we know, right, it's also important to understand, where does it happen? For example, this has been in the papers so many times, and it was in the papers in the past couple of days. The 401 corridor is, a major corridor for human trafficking. The businesses along there are being used. And I think one of the cyber, we've seen a massive increase in cyber sexual exploitation. The statistics are very similar. Majority, over 70%, 75% of the perpetrators are male. And all of this is important, and we'll get into more detail in terms of why this is sort of more important. And finally, what I want to end on is sort of the cyber piece. It looks exactly like sort of regular human trafficking in terms of the statistics. It is more difficult to identify, and we can get into some of the details on why that is so difficult. But cyber sex is on the rise, particularly in the post-COVID world. We've seen a massive increase. You've got adults at home, you've got kids at home.
Thank you, Kareem. The scale and complexity of this is just astounding. Let's change gears and pivot to what we're doing at Scotiabank to continue this fight against this problem. Carolina, when we think about the international footprint, how important is anti-money laundering practices in detecting potential activity and stopping these traffickers?
Thank you, Puneet. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And when we, as my colleagues have mentioned here, when we think about human trafficking, it is a problem at a global scale and affects millions of people. And unfortunately, Latin America and the Caribbean, it's not immune to this crime. In addition to the enormous cost, it's the profitability of the proceeds that it generates. And when we look at just Latin America and the Caribbean, we're talking about $12 billion annually in proceeds just from these regions related to human trafficking, either labor or sexual exploitation. And as Kareem was mentioning as well, most recently, the report suggests that COVID-19 may have increased the trafficking of women across Latin America as well. So while in the past, many aspects of the crime were unseen or were not spoken of, now there's increased understanding of the breadth and gravity of what human trafficking happens in all these jurisdictions, and we're seeing it here. And what have we been doing as financial institutions, and considering the information and the data we have on our customers, transactions, patterns, geographies. All our AML risk practices play a key role in identifying transactions associated with human trafficking through patterns, through different analysis of data. And that would allow us as well with our branch network on identifying and reporting suspicious activity when things and alerts are raised. But for all that, we need education. We need to be aware what are the alerts, and that's something that we continue to be working. And across Latin America and the Caribbean in our communities, Scotiabank works with law enforcement to protect and prevent human trafficking. And some examples of this, it's in Colombia last year. The bank spotted and halted an attempt to transfer money across borders for an organ trafficking operation. So that on the get-go put this usual unseen human trafficking pattern in the bank's radar in something that we can continue working on. So just to conclude, I think as Scotiabankers, we remain committed to speaking up when we see something suspicious, when there's something that causes alerts, and that builds into ensuring that we can detect and protect this type of crimes.
Thank you, Carolina. Turning back to you, Karim, it's really inspiring to hear all the great work Scotia's doing. Can you comment further on what the bank is doing to support the fight against these heinous crimes and the illicit funds flowing through the banking system?
Sure.
And how specifically, how are we leveraging technology and data?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me take a step back, because there was a belief 15 years ago. I dealt with this, and the belief in the industry was not sure why this is a problem, for the financial services industry. Since then, there's a number of industry-led efforts by banks in the US and in Europe, and most recently in Canada with Project Protect, where we saw a significant increase in the reporting of suspicious activity. In the past few weeks, Scotiabank worked with law enforcement, with the Center for the Protection of Children and FinTrack, really to identify red flags for child sexual exploitation. And that's the first of its kind globally, as far as I know. And there are a number of efforts underway to say, okay, this is great. How do we make this a global? How can banks cooperate and leverage each other, both from a data, technology, and analytics perspective, right? So, for example, we have an ongoing adverse media screening process for a number of crimes, but including human trafficking and child sexual exploitation, right? We've invested in training for investigators. We're rolling out specific training for human trafficking for the entire organization. We signed up for the ACAMS free training on human trafficking. And our human trafficking module will be available on me and Scotiabank together with all the red flags. Now, if you look at what we've done most recently, is we took all the data and more, which I talked about, is we incorporated known topologies, we incorporated financial data, we used natural language processing techniques that mimic reading capabilities by machines, right? We used external data, we used sex ads, and we connected all of this using techniques known as entity resolution, and we don't need to get into sort of the details, but basically it connects the dots. And we built models to identify human trafficking with a lot of success. And we're going to start running those, and we are running those every 90 days. On the back of Project Shadow, which was the child sexual exploitation red flags, we've got a lot of calls from a lot of organizations. What did you do? How did you do it? Can you help us do it? So I'm working with 2 NGOs to sort of make that a global initiative. And we took those red flags and we turned that into an AI machine learning model just in the past 2 to 3 weeks. It's still prototype, but again, it's the first in the industry where we don't want this to be a project, a one-off. We want it to be an ongoing exercise that we do every month, every 90 days. And this is why, knowing your data, knowing what you're dealing with, this is why all this information it's disturbing information, disturbing stats, but we can actually put it to good use, because age, gender, location, all of these are data points that we can use.
Thanks a lot, Kareem. When we think about the outlook of combating gender-based financial crime, clearly there's a lot more work that needs to be done. Larissa, what are some of the ways survivors can be supported and rehabilitated into communities?
Yeah, that's actually a pretty complex question, and one that we've been addressing for many years at the Salvation Army. Illuminate, from safe houses to mental health and addictions programs, employment-based programming, development and trauma care. But one of the areas that we continually see that comes up for survivors across many different backgrounds is building their financial understanding, building back their financial health, and supporting economic independence. So many of the survivors that we support, they may have been temporary foreign workers or migrant workers who came to Canada. They may have been youth who happen to be on an app or scrolling online. They might be an individual that identifies as LGBTQ or two-spirit. They could be someone who identifies as a person of color. They could be someone who has had a history of violence or has been exposed to gang life or addictions or substances. And so their needs are quite unique. And we often find that as human trafficking is a financially motivated crime, we have to remember this is an individual that has been bought and sold. They've actually been, unfortunately, a human commodity in a system that actually has some market failure in it, that many systems do actually rely on a form of slavery. And so for them to actually build back their healing and growth, we need to build their economic independence so that they're not vulnerable or at risk to someone coming along again to exploit them, because those factors would still be there. So in 2018, we were working with the United Nations Finance Against Modern Slavery Project, and they started the Survivor Inclusion Initiative, which was to look at financial institutions creating specialized tracks for survivors of trafficking to access financial services and overcome the barriers that they typically would face. We put our hand up and said we would like to be the pilot for Canada, and Scotiabank right away also put their hand up and said we would like to be the pilot site. So for the last 2 years, we built and developed a specialized project with Scotiabank. It started with a consultation with survivors to really hear their voice and to build the project around their needs. We then created a sensitivity framework, specialized training, and we worked through all the challenges. So for example, if a survivor doesn't have identification, what do we do? What if there's a history of financial crime that's not their fault, but it is within their financial records? What if there's considerable amounts of debt? What if they've never had a bank account before and they've never actually used financial services to track kind of their financial health? And so we designed the entire pilot. We ran the pilot for 6 survivors in 2019 to great success. And we're very excited now to be launching this project across Canada in partnership with our organization, but also we have been building our network of nonprofit organizations who can also be part of a national referral mechanism. The next plan is to include other financial institutions. So this project is so significant because it gives tools back to survivors to help them to rebuild their lives, to build empowerment, especially because we see such an overrepresentation of women and girls who are being exploited, to have the tools to take back their life and to live an extraordinary life after the experience of trafficking. So we're very grateful to Scotiabank's partnership on this project.
Thanks, Larissa. And I think I speak on behalf of Scotiabankers when we say we're grateful to you for all the great work you're doing, and we're happy to be a partner. So a final question for Carolina and Albia. For international banking and Peru, respectively, what is your outlook in 2021 and beyond for how we as a bank can continue to lead in this space? Maybe we'll start with you, Carolina, and then move to you, Albia, next.
Absolutely. So, Larissa, that is such a powerful action. And I think in the outlook for 2021, when I look at the international footprint, I know we all believe we have a responsibility, not only as a financial institution, but rather to support the communities where we have presence. Just that support has to be there. And 2021, prevention and raising awareness in all this market is where we want to move forward. It's through forums, education, webinars, making sure the topic is raised. It's not just on the side, it is discussed and there are learnings that are applied from. And additionally, given the transnational approach that this happened and the international footprint the fact that we have the presence in Chile, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, and Canada, Caribbean, creates a strong front to fight this crime. And we need to leverage what we learned from the different jurisdictions. So what Larissa and the work that has been done in Canada, we've talked already about how can we just replicate and leverage those learnings into creating that same kind of partnerships with different organizations and foundations in our Latin American footprint. So human traffic transforms every day. We need to learn, we need to be informed, and we need all our Scotiabankers to learn from that, to be one step ahead. And then when, unfortunately, it happens, be able to provide the support to the people that have been victims of human trafficking to stand up and continue having a fruitful life and enjoying again. So that's where I see most of the outlook in the international footprint.
Thank you, Carolina. Albia, thoughts on Peru?
Yes, first of all, Larissa, you can imagine how I feel your passion, your emotion, and really thank you very much for the work that you are doing. I echo Carolina's work, and if it's possible to chat later about how we, from our contracts, can support the work that you are doing will be great. So thank you very much for your commitment. And back to the question, the main objective as a modern slavery is exploiting a person to acquire money. It's simple, right? And data is a new oil. Data is so important for us to identify the proof of payment, to identify the financial patterns. Data or traffickers and victims. Human trafficking is often a cash-based activity in Peru as well. So we have opportunity to continue working with data, to continue working to continue reporting suspicious transactions. This is something very important to continue doing, to improve our enhanced due diligence process and other financial activities that ring alarm bells. For example, large deposit of money. If we identify a pattern of cash transactions of money between 10 p.m., 6 a.m., so those kind of situations that can help us to identify different situations, right? So also continue working with the authorities and being, all of us have to be responsible and have to be accountable. That is possible also to recognize any patterns or situations that are not normal, right? So with a strong KYC, it's key here. It's really key because we are the persons that know our customers and know what is normal and know what is not normal. So with this information, we can continue fighting with this and helping our communities. This is one of the biggest injustice of our time. So we have also the opportunity to support our communities and to try to build collectively a better world.
Thank you. Thanks for all of your thoughts today. What an incredible conversation. A final question for all of you. Tied to our theme today for International Women's Day is the concept of she said. Tamia said in her video, I'm hopeful about the changes that are coming. If there's one thing you'd want Scotiabankers to take away and remember from this session, what would it be? I'll go around my screen here. So Carolina, maybe we can start with you.
Sure, Praneet. So I'm hopeful too. And I think if we can say we have been successful today, and I'm gonna have two walkaways to mention. First, awareness that human traffic exists and it's very close, it's a reality and it happens everywhere. So it's not somewhere else. And Larissa and Elvia have mentioned it as well. That's the first one. And the second is a role as global financial institution in being aware. We all as Scotiabankers have a role in each of our positions to be aware of the alerts, to understand, and to be able to, with our work, align and know our customers and our communities to prevent and detect this crime.
Thank you. Elbia, how about you?
Yeah, three words. The first one is trust. Our communities, our customers, our stakeholders trust on us. The second one is this is the right thing to do. And we as Scotiabankers, we have in all the things that we do, we think what is right, and this is the right thing to do. And the third one is for every future. And those girls and those women and those persons are also part of our future.
Thank you. Larissa?
I would also give two key takeaways. The first is that I want us to look at this issue not from just the bottom of the cliff. After someone's been victimized, after someone has experienced this horrific crime, what does it look like for us to actually go to the top, the upstream component? So I want to challenge us to think about our own ethical consumerism. We often think trafficking and trafficking consumers are someone other than us. But we often don't realize that we might be contributing to unethical supply chains throughout the world. Let's evaluate our purchasing habits. That might be our everyday products and goods and services. It also might be if we're consuming sexual services like pornography, erotic services, and other. We've seen direct research links to how exploitation and trafficking is riddled through industries, and that we can do something with our purchasing power. The last challenge I would give is to invest. For many of us, we have active investing portfolios. Let's invest in this issue to build up ethical supply chains, to invest in areas that creates development from the ground up, that lifts up women's rights, that lifts up the rights and values and protections of children and vulnerable people. We actually can do quite a bit with our purchasing power. And so I want to challenge us with that today and how we can contribute to this issue.
Thank you. And Kareem, thoughts?
Thank you. So from my perspective, I'm going to approach it a little bit differently. The one thing I can tell you is we're never going to arrest our way out of this problem. And these are my personal views. If we think we're going to, let's leave it to the law enforcement. They're strapped as well, right? So it's the problem's bigger than one agency, right? So what does that mean? Well, it means us as Scotiabankers, if we see something, we need to say, we need to do, right? It's great to look at these reports and say, oh, this is really sad, but what are we going to do about it, right? And we talked about, we've got an obligation to keep our customers safe, right? Our communities safe. I think people need to remember these are low-cost commodities. One of the big changes that has been is women used to be sold for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Now they get sold for just a few dollars. So there's no worth to these individuals, right? This is not, socially a good thing to do. It's our responsibility, but it's becoming good risk management practice. We've seen 2 banks face major penalties, right? But we've got to actually step up and do something. And I do a lot of presentations and I get a lot of calls. What should I do next, right? And I say, well, pick up the phone and join the fight, right? And I say, pick up the phone and join the fight.
Thanks, Kareem. Thank you to our panelists for an important and insightful conversation today. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. Listening, education, and awareness sessions like this are critical to making change. As a bank, we continue to be here to safeguard our customers' trust while keeping the bank safe. This includes continuing the fight against money laundering, human trafficking, and gender-based financial crimes. We've come a long way, but we know there's more work to be done. The outlook is changing because now we see more and we understand more. And we look forward to keeping the conversation going and being a leader in this space. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.